Winter wind cut through the gaps in the wooden barracks like a knife through canvas. Klaus Steiner pulled his thin, British-issued blanket tighter around his shoulders and stared at the two men sitting across from him in the detention camp near Hamburg. He knew their faces. He had seen them every day for years, standing in the same shadows, watching the same doors, protecting the same man. Now, in December 1945, they were just three more ghosts among thousands of defeated German soldiers waiting to learn their fate. Friedrich Weber, barely 24 years old, looked older than the winter itself. Otto Hartmann, the intelligence officer who always knew more than he said, sat with his hands folded carefully in his lap. Around them, other prisoners talked freely about the war, about battles lost and won, about the camps they had survived and the homes they hoped to find. But these three men remained silent. They carried secrets that could destroy what little remained of their world. A British guard called Otto's name for the third time that week. Another interrogation about Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, Germany's most celebrated commander. They wanted to know about North Africa, about the Atlantic Wall, about why such a brilliant general had died in a car accident just weeks after the July 20th assassination attempt on Hitler. The questions came wrapped in politeness, but Klaus heard the suspicion underneath. The British knew something was wrong with the official story. They just could not prove it yet. When Otto returned 2 hours later, his face was gray. He sat down without speaking and stared at the floor. Klaus understood. Every interrogation pulled them deeper into dangerous waters. Tell the truth and risk everything. Stay silent and live with the weight of lies. It was the same impossible choice they had faced on October 14th, 1944, the day two generals arrived at Rommel's home in Herrlingen with a message from Berlin. Klaus had been standing outside the door that morning. He was a sergeant, a bodyguard, a man trained to protect his commander from bullets and bombs. But he could not protect Rommel from his own government. Through the heavy door, he heard fragments of conversation. Words like conspiracy and treason and choice drifted out like poison gas. When Rommel emerged 15 minutes later, his face held the expression of a man already dead. He climbed into the staff car with the two generals and never came back alive. The official announcement came hours later. Cerebral embolism. A hero's death. A state funeral with full military honors. It was all a lie, and Klaus had watched it happen. Friedrich broke the silence first. His voice was barely a whisper in the cold darkness of the barracks. How long do we keep protecting a dead man? Nobody answered. The question hung in the frozen air like their visible breath. They had sworn oaths to Rommel, to the fatherland, to honor and duty. But which oath mattered now when everything they had believed and had turned to ash? The next morning, a woman appeared at the camp gates. She was German, but worked for an American news service. Her name was Anna Reinhardt, and she had been searching for them. The British guards allowed her through after checking her papers. She sat down at the rough wooden table where the three former bodyguards ate their thin soup and told them she knew they were lying. She had documents, witnesses, evidence that Rommel's death was no accident. She wanted to tell the real story, but she needed them to break their silence. Klaus felt his stomach turn to ice. Speaking meant confirming that Nazi Germany had murdered its most famous general. It meant exposing the conspiracy, the forced suicide, the terrible choice Rommel had been given. Death by cyanide with honor and protection for his family, or public trial for treason with execution and destruction of everyone he loved. Rommel had chosen to die to save his wife and son, and his bodyguards had honored that sacrifice by staying silent. But Anna was offering something dangerous and tempting. The chance to tell the truth. The chance to show the world that Rommel had opposed Hitler in the end, that he had refused to execute prisoners, that he had stood against the madness even when it cost him everything. Klaus looked at Friedrich and Otto. He saw the same struggle in their eyes. They were tired of carrying the weight alone. Anna reached in her bag and pulled out a letter. The paper was yellowed and creased, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Rommel's distinctive script, written to a resistance contact months before the assassination attempt. She laid it on the table between them like a hand grenade with the pin already pulled. I know you saw more than you have said, she told him quietly. "I know what really happened. Help me tell his story. Not the propaganda version. Not the myth. The truth about a soldier who tried to stop the madness and paid with his life." Klaus reached out and touched the letter with one finger. The paper felt fragile, like it might crumble to dust. Friedrich was crying silently. Otto's jaw was clenched so tight Klaus could see the muscles jumping. Outside, the winter wind howled through the ruined landscape of Germany. Somewhere in that wasteland, Rommel's widow and son were trying to survive under the protection of the lie. Speaking could destroy them, but staying silent was destroying Klaus from the inside. He looked up at Anna and made a decision that would change everything. The interrogation room smelled of damp concrete and British cigarettes. Klaus sat across from Anna and two British intelligence officers, knowing that every word he spoke would be weighed and measured and potentially used against him. But he had made his choice. The truth was more important than safety now. He closed his eyes and let the memories flood back, pulling him across years and miles to a place where the sun burned white and the sand stretched forever. North Africa, 1942. Klaus had been young then, proud to serve under the legendary Desert Fox. The Afrika Korps was Hitler's favorite weapon, a mechanized force that had conquered half the Mediterranean coast. But standing in the desert heat, watching supply trucks break down and water rations shrink, Klaus learned that legends ran on fuel and ammunition like any other army. And they were always running out. Friedrich spoke next, his voice steady now that the dam of silence had broken. He described the brutal reality of desert warfare that newsreels never showed. Temperatures that reached 50 degrees Celsius in summer, dropping below freezing at night. Saying that got into everything: machinery, weapons, food, lungs. Men died from dehydration before they saw combat. Tanks broke down from heat stress. Supply convoys that should have taken days took weeks, crawling across hundreds of miles of hostile terrain while British aircraft hunted them from above. But Friedrich also remembered something else. The Desert Fox treated captured British soldiers with a respect that shocked everyone. After the fall of Tobruk in June 1942, Rommel personally ordered that British wounded receive the same medical care as German troops. When SS officers arrived from Berlin demanding that Jewish prisoners be separated and executed, Rommel refused. Friedrich was standing outside the tent when Rommel's voice cut through the canvas like a blade. "In my command, we fight soldiers, not civilians. We follow the Geneva Convention. If Berlin disagrees, they can send someone else to lose their war in Africa." Otto took over the narrative, explaining what the official histories left out. By late 1942, Rommel knew the North African campaign was lost. British forces under Montgomery had superior numbers, better supply lines, and complete air superiority. Hitler demanded that Rommel hold every inch of ground. Retreat was forbidden, victory was mandatory. But Rommel was drafting reports that told a different truth. Without massive reinforcements and fuel supplies that Germany could not provide, the Afrika Korps would be destroyed. Otto processed those reports before they went to Berlin. He watched them come back with angry responses demanding offensive action regardless of reality. Klaus described the Second Battle of El Alamein in October and November 1942. It was the turning point, the moment when the Desert Fox finally ran out of miracles. Montgomery attacked with nearly 200,000 men and over 1,000 tanks. Rommel had barely 100,000 troops and less than 500 operational tanks, many already low on fuel. The British bombardment began on October 23rd with almost 900 artillery pieces firing simultaneously. Klaus remembered the ground shaking like an earthquake. He watched Rommel stand in the command post, face illuminated by flickering electric lights, studying maps that showed disaster from every direction. The retreat that followed stretched over 2,000 miles, from Egypt all the way back to Tunisia. Friedrich described it as a fighting withdrawal that lasted months, with Rommel's mechanized units acting as a rear guard to protect Italian infantry that had been abandoned by their own commanders. The Desert Fox moved among his exhausted troops, personally organizing defensive positions, sharing his own dwindling rations, refusing to leave until every unit had pulled back. Klaus saw German soldiers crying when Rommel's car passed. They knew their general cared about their lives, unlike the leadership in Berlin that treated them as expendable pieces on a game board. But something else was happening during that long retreat. Otto revealed the darker current running beneath military operations. Rommel was changing, growing harder and more bitter toward the Nazi regime. He wrote letters criticizing Hitler's strategic incompetence. He made comments about ending the war before Germany was completely destroyed. Otto, monitoring all communications, understood the danger. Speaking such thoughts was treason. Speaking them repeatedly was suicide. Anna leaned forward, her pencil moving rapidly across her notepad. The British officers exchanged glances. This was more than military history. This was evidence of dissent within the Wehrmacht's highest ranks, proof that not every German general had been a mindless Nazi follower, but was also dangerous. If Rommel had opposed Hitler as early as 1943, why had he continued fighting? Why had he accepted a new command in France? The contradictions were uncomfortable. Klaus answered the unasked question. Rommel was a soldier. He had sworn an oath to Germany, not to Hitler, though the Nazis had deliberately conflated the two. He believed he could serve his country while resisting the regime's worst orders. He thought he could protect his soldiers from SS brutality while still fulfilling his military duty. It was an impossible position, and by 1943, Rommel was beginning to understand just how impossible. The interrogation continued late into the night. 3 men who had stood in Rommel's shadow were finally speaking, letting the desert ghosts rise and testify. But the hardest part of the story was still ahead, waiting in the shadows of 1944, when military opposition would turn into conspiracy and the Desert Fox would face a choice between honor and survival that no soldier should ever have to make. The snow had stopped falling outside the detention camp, but inside the interrogation room, the temperature seemed to drop as Klaus began describing France in 1944. This was the part of the story that could still get them all killed. The British officers leaned forward. Anna's hand trembled slightly as she wrote. Even Otto, who had maintained careful composure for days, looked haunted. Rommel had been assigned to inspect the Atlantic Wall defenses in late 1943, then given command of Army Group be defending northern France. Hitler expected his famous general to stop the inevitable Allied invasion. But Klaus, Friedrich, and Otto quickly realized they were no longer guarding a simple military commander. They were protecting a man engaged in something far more dangerous than battlefield tactics. The visitors started arriving in early 1944. Senior Wehrmacht officers who spoke in careful euphemisms and cleared rooms before conversations. General Karl Heinrich von Stulpnagel, military governor of France. Caesar von Hoffaker, a sophisticated staff officer with connections to the German resistance. Lieutenant Colonel Claus von Stauffenberg, who walked with a limp and was missing his left eye, right hand, and 2 fingers of his left hand from wounds suffered in Tunisia. These men were plotting to kill Adolf Hitler. Klaus described standing outside Rommel's office at La Roche-Guyon, a beautiful chateau overlooking the Seine that had become the field marshal's headquarters. Voices carried through the heavy wooden door. "After Hitler is removed," was a phrase Klaus heard multiple times. His blood had turned to ice water. Hearing such words meant sharing the crime of treason under Nazi law. Any loyal German soldier would report it immediately. But Klaus stayed silent, night after night, as the conspiracy deepened. Friedrich revealed his own crisis of conscience. SS surveillance of Rommel intensified throughout the spring. Gestapo agents appeared in nearby villages, asking questions about the field marshal's visitors and attitudes. One day, a young SS officer cornered Friedrich in a hallway. "Your commander keeps dangerous company," the officer said quietly. A loyal soldier would report such concerns to proper authorities. Consider where your loyalty truly lies. It was a recruitment pitch and a threat simultaneously. Report Rommel or become suspect yourself. Friedrich made a choice that still gave him nightmares. He told Rommel everything. The SS pressure, the surveillance, the clear danger. Rommel had listened calmly, then said something Friedrich would never forget. "If they come for me, don't resist. Don't become martyrs for an old general. Survive, remember the truth, and tell it when the time comes. That will be your service to Germany. It sounded like a man preparing to die. Otto explained the intelligence where he fought through the first half of 1944. He intercepted Gestapo communications about Rommel. He deliberately lost certain reports before they reached Berlin. He fed false information suggesting the field marshal was simply war-weary and pessimistic, not treasonous. But Otto was fighting a losing battle. The net was tightening, and everyone in Rommel's inner circle knew it. The Allied invasion came on June 6th. Rommel was actually in Germany visiting his wife on her birthday, having been assured by meteorologists that weather conditions made invasion impossible. He raced back to France, but the battle was already underway. Klaus described the desperate weeks that followed. Rommel fought brilliantly with inadequate forces, trying to contain the Allied breakout, while Hitler demanded impossible counterattacks and refused to allow any retreat. The field marshal drove himself to exhaustion, visiting frontline units under constant air attack, organizing defenses that everyone knew could not hold forever. On July 17, 1944, British fighter aircraft strafed Rommel's staff car on a French road. The driver was killed, the car crashed, and Rommel suffered a severe skull fracture. Klaus, following in another vehicle, reached the wreckage within minutes. He thought Rommel was dead, but the field marshal was alive, unconscious, and critically wounded. They rushed him to a hospital, then to Germany for recovery. Rommel would never return to active command. 3 days later, on July 20th, Stauffenberg planted a bomb at Hitler's military headquarters. The explosion failed to kill the Führer, and the coup attempt collapsed within hours. The Gestapo arrested hundreds of conspirators. Under torture, several revealed that Rommel had known about the plot, though he had refused to participate in assassination, insisting that Hitler should be arrested and tried rather than murdered. That Otto's voice became flat and mechanical as he described what happened next. Rommel was recovering at his home in Herrlingen, still weak from his head injuries. On October 14th, two generals arrived. Wilhelm Burgdorf and Ernst Mazel brought a message from Berlin. The evidence against Rommel was substantial. His connections to the conspirators were documented. But Hitler remembered Rommel's popularity with the German people and the army. A public trial would be embarrassing and potentially destabilizing. So they offered a choice: suicide by cyanide with full military honors and protection for his family, or public trial for treason, execution, and destruction of everyone he loved. His wife, his 15-year-old son, all would face the consequences of his actions. Rommel would have 2 hours to decide. Klaus's voice broke as he described watching Rommel walk to the staff car that morning. The 3 bodyguards knew something terrible was happening but were powerless to stop it. 15 minutes after the car left, Otto received a coded message. Cerebral embolism. State funeral approved. The Desert Fox had chosen to die to protect his family. The regime staged a hero's death for a man they had murdered for opposing them. Anna stopped writing. The British officers sat in silence. The truth was finally out, spoken aloud after a year of silence. But revealing this story meant confirming that everything was more complicated, more tragic, and more terrible than anyone wanted to believe. The story broke in March 1947 across American, British, and Swiss newspapers simultaneously. Anna had worked for over a year gathering testimony, verifying facts, building an unassailable case. The headline was simple and devastating. Desert Fox murdered. Rommel's forced suicide revealed. The reaction across defeated Germany and the Allied world was immediate and explosive. Klaus, Friedrich, and Otto had been released from detention by then, but they quickly learned that freedom did not mean safety. Neo-Nazi sympathizers, still organizing in the shadows of occupied Germany, branded them traitors who had betrayed the fatherland's greatest hero. Victim groups and Jewish survivors despised any attempt to portray a Wehrmacht field marshal in sympathetic terms, regardless of his late opposition to Hitler. Communist agents from the Soviet zone wanted different revelations, different testimony, different uses for the bodyguard's knowledge. Everyone wanted to weaponize the truth for their own purposes, but something else was happening too. Letters began arriving at the newspaper offices where Anna worked. From former Afrika Korps soldiers who remembered Rommel sharing his water rations in the desert. From French civilians who recalled German troops under Rommel's command behaving with restraint when other units committed atrocities. From British veterans who spoke of captured comrades receiving medical care and respect when Rommel commanded the battlefield. The Desert Fox had been an enemy, but he had been an honorable enemy. That mattered to men who had survived hell and understood that honor in wartime was rare and precious. The three bodyguards scattered after publication. Friedrich emigrated to Argentina, unable to remain in Germany with its ghosts and impossible moral questions. He sent occasional letters describing his new life farming in the Pampas, but every letter eventually circled back to those years serving Rommel, to the weight of witnessing history and surviving when better men had died. He never married, never truly settled. The Desert Fox haunted him across oceans and decades. Klaus stayed in his destroyed hometown, finding his wife and children alive in a refugee camp against all odds. He became a schoolteacher, instructing a new generation of German children about their nation's terrible history. He taught them that following orders was not enough, that conscience mattered, that resistance, even when it failed, was better than complicity. His students sometimes asked about the war. Klaus would tell them about a general who tried to maintain human decency in indecent times, and how that general paid with his life for recognizing evil too late. That Otto's path was strangest of all. He joined the intelligence services being organized by the Western Allies for the emerging Cold War. His knowledge of Wehrmacht structures and personnel made him valuable. He worked to identify actual war criminals while defending officers who had, like Rommel, tried to resist from within the system. It was morally gray work, full of impossible compromises, but Otto believed it honored Rommel's memory better than either simple revenge or simple forgiveness. The world was complicated, and simple answers served no one. Anna continued as a journalist, becoming one of the most respected chroniclers of ordinary people caught in history's machinery. The Rommel story launched her career, but she never sensationalized it, never made the Desert Fox into either villain or saint. He remained what he was, a talented general who served evil before opposing it. A man of honor in a dishonorable regime who discovered too late that honor alone could not stop systematic brutality. His story was tragedy, not redemption, and Anna made sure readers understood the difference. That in 1950, the three former bodyguards reunited at Rommel's grave in Hurlingen. Lucy Rommel, the widow, had invited them. She was older now, marked by years of being both protected and imprisoned by the lie about her husband's death. Her son Manfred, now 21, stood beside her. He would eventually become mayor of Stuttgart, serving democratic Germany with the same integrity his father had tried to maintain in impossible circumstances. Lucy spoke simply. "Thank you for telling the truth, for remembering Erwin as a man, not a myth, for letting the world know he tried to stop the madness, even though he failed." Her voice was steady, but her eyes held tears that would not fall. She had lived with the terrible bargain her husband made, trading his life for her safety. Now the world knew the full cost of that sacrifice. Klaus, Friedrich, and Otto stood in silence at the grave. They had protected Rommel's life when they could and failed. They had protected his truth when they could and succeeded. It was an imperfect victory, but it was the only one available. The Desert Fox's reputation would remain complicated forever. Some would see him as a hero who opposed Hitler. Others would see him as a Nazi general whose late opposition did not erase years of service to evil. Both views held truth. History was never as simple as myth suggested. Klaus spoke for all three of them. "We serve the Desert Fox. Not perfectly, but faithfully. The story will outlive us all now. Let people judge as they will. We told the truth. That has to be enough." They left flowers at the grave, simple ones, nothing grand. Around them, West Germany was slowly rebuilding from ruins, trying to become something different from the nightmare it had been. The bodyguards walked away knowing they had kept faith with a complicated man in complicated times. They had witnessed history, survived it, and finally spoken truth about it. In a world built on lies and myths and comfortable simplifications that mattered. Perhaps it was the only thing that truly mattered. Somewhere, perhaps, a general who tried and failed to stop catastrophe rested easier knowing his story survived complete, human, and true.